Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. You know when you've got an idea and you think, hey, that's a good idea, then you start doing the idea, you sort of get halfway into it and then you think, maybe this isn't such a good idea? Yeah, that I kind of had one of those ideas. I thought it'd be cool to get some of the graphics cards, a good percentage of the graphics cards that we'll be looking at today, and put them on the desk. And then I wasn't really sure how I would put them on the desk, so I thought I'd make this sort of pyramid type thing here. Didn't really work because they're all sort of different heights, and now I'm just terrified that it's all going to fall apart and they're going to go everywhere. So I guess at least the camera's on, so if that happens, you know, we'll catch it on film. And then the other idea I had was that I would upgrade the used GPU, the second-hand GPU buying guide that we did in 2018 and then in 2019. So I'd do a 2020 edition, which involves testing 80 AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. Again, I sort of got halfway through that testing over a week ago and thought maybe this isn't such a good idea. I'm starting to regret some of my decisions. Anyway, I pushed through just as I did with the construction of the GPU pyramid here, the graphics card pyramid, and I tested all 80 AMD and NVIDIA GPUs in 3 games using 2 quality presets. But for my own sanity, I've limited the testing to a single resolution 1080p. Now, as I said, I do this each year to create what I believe is the ultimate second-hand graphics card buying guide, and I do so in the hope that it'll make it easier for you guys to snag a great value deal. And I think this content could be quite timely this year, with many of you having to try and save some money and while also entertaining yourself while being face stuck inside. So gaming is something that I know a lot of you will be doing a lot of. So yeah, hopefully this works out well. And if that is the case, and you're in desperate need of a new graphics card and you want to save as much money as possible by buying secondhand, then strap yourself in. We're going to cover a lot of data. For the last 2 installments in this series, I've tested with 3 games at 1080p using medium quality settings, and I'll be doing that once again. However, in addition, I'll also provide some high quality preset results as well, just for those of you interested. But for the bulk of this analysis, I will be relying on the medium quality data, as this really is more of a buying guide for past generation GPUs rather than the newer, quite high-end stuff such as the RTX 2070 and 2080 as an example. Moreover, the current generation of GPUs, they're just constantly being benchmarked in new games and new reviews and all that sort of stuff. You can find them all across the internet. So yeah, finding that data isn't too difficult, and therefore it doesn't make sense to make that the focus of this video. What can be quite difficult is to find how the GeForce 910 series perform relative to the Radeon 200, 300, and 500 series of GPUs. Oh, and the 400 series as well, we'll be looking at. Always forget about the Radeon 400 series. It was basically rebranded as the 500 series with a bit of a clock speed tweak. Anyway, so that will be the focus, but of course, for reference, I will include some of the current generation GPUs as well. So there'll be some of the new guys in there for you guys to compare with. I should note though that I have avoided testing with games such as Doom Eternal, which can run poorly on older hardware due to a lack of driver optimization, and that optimization could still come in the future. We've seen NVIDIA update for Forza Horizon 4 for their current and even older generation GPUs quite some time after the game was released, and there's a few other examples of that, so we won't jump to any wild conclusions just yet. But I am sticking to DirectX 11 titles, as that API is better supported by older generation GeForce GPUs. So we have Battlefield 5, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and F1 2019 all tested using DX11. Then, because this is a GPU benchmark and we don't want to limit the performance of any of the GPUs, or at least as much as we can avoid that, I'm going to use our standard GPU test system featuring a Core i9 9900K, which has been overclocked to 5 GHz with 16 GB of DDR4 3400 memory. So let's start by looking at how the GeForce GPUs performed, and then the Radeon GPUs, and then I'll eliminate any of the options that you probably shouldn't bother with as they're too slow or whatever. Here are the medium quality results for the GeForce GPUs, and for all of the analysis in this video, we're looking at a 3-game average, as that just helps simplify everything. Moving forward, I will be removing any GPUs that couldn't deliver an average of at least 40 FPS under these test conditions, so that means from the GTX 760 down, I'll be dropping 11 GeForce GPUs. This also means some of the GeForce GTX 600 series CPUs didn't make the cut, and I'd be cautious of buying any graphics card with just 2 GB of VRAM in 2020. 4 GB really is the bare minimum now, so keep that in mind as we move forward. As an example, with the high quality preset enabled, the GTX 670 dipped down below 40 FPS on average, while the 680 and GTX 770 just skated by. Most of the GPUs below the 40 FPS threshold are limited to a 2GB VRAM buffer, so again, you probably want to avoid those particular models. And then just pushing over 40 FPS, we have GPUs such as the GTX 1050 Ti, GTX 780 and GTX 1650. Then once we reach the GTX 1060 3GB, we've almost reached 60 FPS on average, and then the 6GB 1060 and GTX 980 get us there. So the older Radeon GPUs, they seem to fare a bit better with products such as the HD 7870 making the cut despite only packing 2GB of VRAM. But again, I'd avoid such products unless your intention is, for example, to play titles such as Rocket League, CSGO, and Fortnite with competitive settings, so low quality presets. The 7970 with 3GB of VRAM will fare a little better moving forward, but again, I'd advocate for at least 4GB of VRAM when possible. This means grabbing something like the Radeon R9 380X or R9 290 for example. As for the more modern Radeon GPUs, anything above the RX 470/570 still has plenty of fight left in it yet. Jumping to the high quality setting sees everything below the R9 380 unable to exceed 40 FPS on average, and for these settings you'll ideally want a Radeon R9 290 or 390 or basically anything better. The Radeon RX 570 is a great value option here, and it's available with either a 4 or 8GB memory buffer. Here I'm testing with the 4GB version, and for this selection of games that's just fine, but newer titles will require you to tweak the texture quality settings for example. So just for reference, here are the AMD and Nvidia GPUs that did make the cut. Here we have 43 products in total, and again the GPUs that failed to deliver at least 40 FPS on average were removed, along with the current gen models that have been on the market for less than a year. The margins here between the various AMD and Nvidia GPUs are what you'll typically find across a wide spread of games, but again, there are some newer titles that punish some of these older GPUs, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. For now, let's move on to the cost analysis. Okay, so we're going to scroll from the bottom to the top of this cost per frame graph. So pause at any point if you want to take a closer look at the data. Basically, what we have here is the GPU name, followed by, in brackets, the number of items sold since the start of the year. Then next to that, we have the average selling price of the last 12 successful listings. Then on the graph in blue, we have the resulting cost per frame, and then either in green or red, depending on the brand, we have the average FPS. So if you take the average selling price and then divide that by the average frame rate, you get the cost per frame. That means you can take this data and then adjust the pricing in your region to work out which graphics card will offer you the most value. Remember, this is the average sale price, so ideally you don't want to pay more than this, and with some patience and or luck, there's a chance you can come in under that price, and I suggest that's what you do aim for. In order to help streamline the process, I've removed GPUs that saw less than 40 sales since the start of the year, and I've done this because your chances of landing a Radeon R9 Fury X, for example, at a reasonable price is very slim, given that finding one for sale is even slimmer. In that example, just 10 have been sold on eBay.com since the start of the year. Additionally, I've also ditched the Kepler-based models since I can no longer in good conscience recommend them, given how poor performance is in a number of new titles. So, removing all those GPUs, we're now left with 32, and rather than sort by price or cost per frame, I'm going to stick with the frame rate as I feel it makes it easier to weed out the best options in each performance tier. The outright cheapest options, again when comparing the average sale price, is the Radeon R9 270X and R9 380, both averaging out at $47. That being the case, if you're on a tight budget, I'd suggest keeping an eye out for the R9 380, just make sure you get a 4GB version. Of all the GPUs tested, the R9 380 also offered the best cost per frame, the only issue being that well under 100 of them have been sold since the start of the year, so finding a 4GB model at the right price will be harder than, let's say, finding a GTX 960, and that's because 355 of them have been sold, but I'd avoid the 960 given it is generally more expensive and slightly worse in terms of performance. If you have a little more money to play with, the Radeon RX 470 is an amazingly good deal, selling on average for just $72, and that sees it come out at a similar cost per frame to that of the R9 380, as you get a little over 40% more performance, and that really does lead to a much better gaming experience at 1080p. There's also the RX 570, which is available in significantly higher volumes. Already over 1,000 of them have been sold on eBay this year, and at $86, it's a cracking good deal. Yes, it is true the cost per frame for the average selling price is higher than the RX 470, but your chances of landing one for a good price is just much higher, like a lot higher. Then we have Nvidia's GTX 1060 6GB. It still makes out quite well in today's latest games, but the average sale price for this model is just too high at $148, and I'm surprised only 350 of them have been sold this year. For that level of performance, you're just far better off getting an RX 480 or 580. The 580 is currently selling new for around $170 US, so grabbing one secondhand for around $130, it's a decent saving, and for that level of performance, it really is a solid purchase. There's also an insane amount of them available on the used market. Next, I'd turn my attention to the GTX 1070 and Vega 56. Both are good options for around $200. I did recently revisit both in a head-to-head comparison, and although the Radeon GPU was around 10% faster on average, I recommended you invest the time to look at GTX 1070s, and I did that for a few reasons. Firstly, there's just loads more quality AIB models, so they're cards from Asus, Gigabyte, and so on. They've just got bigger coolers, better quality PCBs, they run cooler and quieter, and there's just a huge variety of them. And that is opposed to virtually none for Vega 56, and the models that do exist are mostly loud and hot. There have also been just 306 Vega 56 graphics cards sold this year, compared to a whopping 1,611 GTX 1070. So your chances of landing a quality GeForce graphics card at a good price is significantly higher. Having said all that, if you can find a quality Sapphire or Power Color Vega 56 graphics card for around the average selling price, that would be a good way to go. I just think your chances are going to be incredibly slim. So if you're pressed for time or you just don't want to spend ages trolling through eBay sales, the GTX 1070 is going to be a safe bet here. Then for those of you able to spend around $300, the RTX 2060 and GTX 1080 become available, and they're really the best options here. The 2060 is selling for a little less on average. That being the case, along with the architectural improvements of the 2060, this would be my choice at this price point. Though be aware you can buy these new for around $330, so just $40 more than the average selling price of the used models, and frankly, the 12% discount really isn't worth dealing with the potential pitfalls of secondhand shopping. So unless you can find one for, let's say, $250 or less, it's just better to buy new in my opinion. Beyond that, at the high end, the GTX 1080 Ti is really the only option worth considering. There are plenty of them up for sale as well. Already 1,222 have sold, and the average selling price is very reasonable for the resulting performance. And there's boatloads of quality AIB models to pick from as well. Paying around 25% more for a second-hand RTX 2080 for ray tracing support and a handful of select games, and the promise of DLSS 2.0, again in a handful of games, just doesn't seem worth it to me. Likewise, I feel a Radeon 7 is a pretty poor choice for gamers. The reference design, which is the only design, it kind of sucks, and less than 100 of them have sold this year, so finding one at a reasonable price is probably going to be pretty difficult anyway. So if we highlight what I believe are the better value or easier to acquire options, this is what we get. The Radeon R9 380, R9 390, RX 470, RX 570, RX 480, RX 580, and then the GeForce GTX 1070, RTX 2060, GTX 1080, and GTX 1080 Ti. Basically, when spending well under $200, Radeon graphics cards are the way to go, and for over $200, you're generally better served by a GeForce-based graphics card, and this is especially true when spending more than $300. So there you have it. I've not managed to knock any of these off the table yet. Little concerned still, but anyway, we've got this far. But yeah, that's the breakdown of the current used GPU market. Pretty much the full breakdown. For those of you in different regions, or perhaps you just have different pricing, maybe you're watching this video well into the future and pricing has changed, it's really the frame rate results that probably serve as the best guide here. You can simply divide the current asking price of any of these graphics cards by the average frame rate, and that will give you the cost per frame. And that's just a really easy way to compare a few models that happen to be in your price range. Or alternatively, you can just research which models are available at your given price point and then just check the performance. It's probably an easy way to work out which one you should buy. And of course, for those lower end models that come with either a 2 or 4 gigabyte VRAM buffer, make sure you get the 4 gigabyte version. I'm pretty confident 2 gigabyte cards, they'll end up being a bit of a disastrous move going forward. Also, I'd be wary of buying NVIDIA GPUs older than the GeForce 10 series. Driver optimizations for the Maxwell-based 900 series for upcoming games is probably going to start suffering a bit, especially over the next year or two, so keep that in mind. For now though, GeForce 900 series cards such as the GTX 980, 980 Ti, they can be pretty good investments at the right price. Just make sure you do snag one for under the average selling price. As usual, the Radeon GPUs have continued to age very well, but if you want something a little more high-end than an RX 580, for now at least, all options are GeForce based, at least the better value ones. And I think that is going to do it for this one. I've really got to wrap this up and gently deconstruct this mess. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. I'll probably leave the camera filming as I do it. I think I should be able to pull it off. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed all the work that went into this one. Spent a few weeks gathering the data. Hopefully it has been useful and steers a couple of you, or at least a lot of you, in the right direction. But yeah, that's really going to do it for this one. Do the like, subscribe thing if you haven't done that. We've got Patreon. You can get access to our exclusive Discord chat, monthly live stream, which Tim and I will be doing later this month. Q&As, stuff like that. There's a few behind the scenes videos. And yeah, above all else, just thank you very much for watching. I'm your host, Steve. And I'll see you again next time.